Welcome to Day 3 of Positionality, a symposium on Latinx and Latin American art in Canada. Today we're joined by Diogo Rodriguez de Varos, who will be chairing today's session, Feminist and Queer Perspectives. I would like to start the session off by acknowledging the land on which Sur Gallery is placed on the traditional territories of many Indigenous nations. This area, known as Tekaranto, has been caretaken by the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, and we acknowledge that the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peacefully share and care for the Great Lakes region. Today, the meeting place at Tekaranto is home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are very grateful to have the opportunity as immigrants and settlers to this land to work and present here. We also realize that today we're all coming from different regions throughout Canada, perhaps even Latin America or elsewhere. And this land acknowledgement only covers a small portion of unceded territories. I encourage you all to learn more about the land on which you are situated, the traditional ways of knowing and being prior to colonial impositions and genocidal practices. As a starting point, I recommend visiting native-land.ca. I'm going to copy that link into the chat. And with that, I will pass it over to Diogo to get us started. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. This is the third panel of the symposium titled Intersectional, Queer and Feminist Identities. And this should be, of course, a space of openness, respect and collaboration so that we can have fruitful, honest discussions. Thank you so much to Sur Gallery, to Tamara Toledo and Hannah Glazer for the organization of the event, and also for the invitation to create and share this panel today. Sur Gallery and Tamara have been doing a wonderful work of creating a Latin American network in Canada, in the arts in Canada, and I'm really thankful to be part of it. Also being Brazilian and being based in Montreal, I'm also happy to see lots of Brazilians being represented in different panels. And also for today's panel, I'm happy to see half-half, two artists from French-speaking Canada and two artists based in English-speaking Canada. So I'm really happy to have the four of you today. As Hannah has already said, we have today a simultaneous translation into Spanish and Portuguese, tradução simultânea em português para quem tiver interesse. With that, I'll go to the first panelist, Nicolas Dawson, who will present Read, Write and Dance, Thoughts on a Queer Latina Depression. Born in Chile and based in Montreal, Nicolas Dawson is a writer, scholar, and editor. He's the author of La Déposition des Chemins, published in 2010, Animitas, 2017, Nous sommes un continent, Correspondance mestiza, published with Karine Rousseau in 2021, and Désormais ma demeure, 2020, whose English translation by David Bradford, titled House Within a House, will be published by Brick Books in 2023. He's currently completing a doctoral thesis in art studies and practices at UQAM, titled Vueltas, Memory, Borders, Exile, and Diasporic Narratives. Nicolas?
Hi, everyone. Hi, thanks, Diogo, for the invitation. So I'm going to read excerpts of that book, House Within a House, that's been translated by David Bradford, which is a book of poetry, but also essays and stories and photography. So it's about depression and a queer and racialized perspective on depression. So I have a PowerPoint presentation. So just share my screen. Okay, so there's a quote. Let's talk about queer pessimism and how to decentralize happiness. It's from Christopher Soto, Sad Girl Poems. So to read essays about depression and then feel genuine discomfort that has nothing to do with the illness, but modulates it, adorns it in colors that reduce me to silence, an intense yet so very familiar uneasiness. Regardless of their gender or place of origins, these writers did have one thing in common. They were white, all of them, which placed me in the peculiar position of having very little choice but to look to these white people for some sense of validation, some basic understanding of who I am as a depressive and ultimately as a person underneath this illness. I'm used to being the minority in most of the cultural spaces I'm active in Quebec's literary, artistic, academic, and pedagogical spaces. My communities are relatively homogeneous, and I often take up a funny role in them. Though I'm sometimes labeled a killjoy or a radical, mostly I'm told my racialized perspective is a necessary one, and most of the time I'm listened to. What I say is heard. An attempt, for better or for worse, is made to understand the difference because, among other things, my studies, diplomas, my work, my bylines have legitimized my place in these spaces mostly populated by people who benefit from many privileges, especially in relation to class. It is said that depression is a rich person's illness. It's obviously not that simple, and melancholy isn't strictly a white condition either. Nevertheless, we have to turn to fiction to see depression, madness, isolation, silence, and the unmooring and suffering of the mind acknowledged thanks to the works of non-white people, many of them from modest backgrounds, situated within heavily stratified social systems made of various repressions, racial and colonial above all, and power imbalances. Think of novels of James Baldwin, Toni Morrison, Pedro Lemebel, Leonora Miano, and Gabriel Garcia Marquez, the poems of Teresa Calderón, Gabriela Mistral, Gloria Anzaldúa, and Carmen Berenguer, the songs of Violeta Parra. To read essays about depression then, and to look for other ones that approach depression differently from elsewhere, from the margins where those less rich and less white live and express themselves, so that I may fulfill the need to make my racialized, diasporic, multilingual voice heard at the heart of this community, just as I do in other spaces. To show my mother's face and my own, my round face, my black hair, my hazel eyes, and my brown skin, so that depression may be more than just a white, rich person thing. We too have a right to a depression that's our own, which is to say one that travels through history, colonialism, dictatorships, genocides, exiles, and racism. We too suffer with the passion and fury ridiculously associated with us because of our rhythmic songs and our telenovelas, which amuse, though not without a certain contempt. We suffer with the passion and fury used against us to take away our right to suffer, to discredit our suffering, to reduce it to a simple cultural exotic trait, cleaved from our history, like our gift for celebration and getting angry, passion, fury, rather than filling our depressed silence with these words. Let's listen to it. Let's hear this silence's eloquence, which brings to mind the silences millennia in the making. Silences to which we are still reduced because our celebrations and pop songs are so amusing, they drown out the sobs of your janitor and cleaning women. Listen to and look at what's so particular about our depression, the memory they reveal, memories being snatched away by friend and stranger, stuffed into vessels that traversed vast spaces of water, chained, whipped, branded, hunted, and sold by overlapping generational systems of degradation. Our depressions recall the traumas of our ancestors, are performed just as our racialization is, just as our brownness, which names the illness and symptoms in a different way, at times beneath what dominant when white epistemologies have developed as a pathological vocabulary of depression. Depression is not brown, but there are modalities of depression that seem quite brown, modalities that isolate our experiences and euphemize our condition. Our depressions are further tenuous, further oblique, become Latino maladies, los nervios and ataques. To give them a shape of their own, we'll draw on our fictions, on our poems, on our folklore, so that we may cease to remain beneath this illness, so that our tongues, colors, and subjectivities may make this illness their own. Our depressions are complicated because they originate not only in our experiences of discrimination, marginalization, and racism, but also in our internalization of these conditions, of the racist gaze we lay on ourselves, of the words we repeat to invalidate our pains to be part of the group that dominates us. How often do we people of color place our necks on the chopping block? What's more, we're attached to our depressions because they're a form of agency. We're attached to our own forms of depression, to our own melancholy, because it's at once a trace and a consequence of our experiences with marginalization, a wound we drag along, and a weapon we turn to our executioners. We're attached to our depression because it exists for raised subjects as a sign of rejection and as a psychic strategy in response to that rejection. That's why our depression isn't the same as yours. El sufrimiento no es igual to suffering. To read essays, to pluralize my depression, to give it shapes that look like me, that correspond to the subjectivities with which I think and live, and for which I have also suffered. Essays that echo experiences of exclusion that in part made me who I am, that echo the violence of these rules, norms, and conventions I didn't know how to take on, and from which I had to try, not without consequence, to emancipate myself. To diversify and decenter my readings, to explore the affective potential of queer, so as to get away from the heterosexual norms underpinning a great many of the essays I was reading. The abundant mentions of spouses and children suffice to transform an interested reading into another experience of exclusion, into a reading made uncomfortable by heterosexuality, the system that functions powerfully, not only as a series of norms and ideals, but also through emotions that shape bodies as well as worlds. These essays that sensitively study more or less marginal experiences are still decidedly located within a normative system that reserves its comforts only for those who can inhabit it. Queer subjects, when faced by the comforts of heterosexuality, may feel uncomfortable. The body does not sink into a space that has already taken its shape. Discomfort is a feeling of disorientation. One's body feels out of place, awkward, unsettled. Studying literature got me used to making do with this discomfort, recognizing it and adopting the necessary positioning so that it doesn't impede my comprehension, doesn't become a wound, doesn't provoke the anger I nevertheless feel and have learned to contain from one reading to the next. However, this discomfort, like a kind of exasperation, always compels me to look elsewhere, to find other voices in order to read texts which, though they might fail to create a new comfort, name the contortions to which some of us must subject ourselves just to read, understand, reflect on, attempt to recognize ourselves. Contortions of reading that are in fact contortions of our identities, means of invisibilizing ourselves, a skill queer folks have long mastered. This discomfort is etched onto our skin, gives it shapes. We tame with resilience, provides us with an acute awareness of the surface of one's body, but it also gives rise to an embodied sensation of mental, psychic, psychological disorientation, itself compounded by a condition to which queer people must yield to every day, both before and after coming out. Queer subjects may also be asked not to make heterosexuals feel an uncomfortable feeling. The psychological effects of such discomforts, disorientations, and conditions are considerable and often lead to the internalization of these heterosexual norms and requirements to their reproduction within our communities, and therefore to a novel form of assimilation, which paradoxically will never be complete, will always be doomed to fail because, among other things, most of us live with the trauma of the closet, of rejection and homophobia, and battle the eternally haunting desire to turn away from our old pain, though it remains unforgettable. Our suffering awakens the pain that scarred us, that had us hide our sexuality, and then celebrates it spectacularly by appropriating the abuses hurled at us and by drawing new languages out from the shame that colonizes our memory. And despite our astonishing ability to fend off our traumas by incorporating them into struggles and our struggles and our celebrations, sometimes we still end up a depressed minority, used to anticipating the rejection of our families, of our loved ones, of our classmates, of our work colleagues, but also the rejection of people within our own community because it's so codified, because it's a community made up of various relations of power: racism, ageism, masculinism, ableism, classism, misogyny, homonormativity, fatphobia, transphobia, oppressive beauty standards, and a multitude of other discomforts. At times, I feel uncomfortable about inhabiting the word queer, worrying that I am not queer enough, or have not been queer for long enough, or I am just not the right kind of queer. We can feel uncomfortable in the categories we inhabit, even categories that are shaped by the refusal of public comfort. Yes, sometimes we still end up a depressed minority inclined to the excesses, heavy drug use, anorexia, bigorexia, risky sex, which themselves can be huge traps that may lead to, among other things, new rejection, an extra loop with devastating effects: social anxiety, emotional avoidance, detachment, self-rejection, vicious circles born in the closet and which proceed fueled by unending anticipation of countless forms of rejection, as if self-hatred belonged to us, as if it were the foundation on which to build our subjectivity, a hatred which doubles our shame, shame of being ourselves and shame of feeling shame. The embarrassment of owning such feelings, out of place as they are in a movement that takes pride at its watchword: it's acute. Yes, sometimes we still end up a depressed minority, and paradoxically, this queer political heritage to which we add our stories enables us to produce forms of hope that refuse to dismiss such different negatively regarded realities from which queer subjectivities are constructed and which we come up against in our own communities. The hope of queer politics is that bringing us closer to others from whom we have been barred might also bring us to different ways of living with others. Such possibilities are not about being free from norms. A queer hope is not then sentimental. It is effective, precisely in the face of persistence of forms of life that endure the negative attachment of the not. Queer maintains its hope for non-repetition only insofar as it announces the persistence of the norms and values that make queer feelings queer in the first place. This queer hope is, of course, not, of course, only possible if we take into account the circumstances of our emancipation from what formerly confined us. An emancipation made possible by the creation of communities wherein relations, sexuality, friendship, and family are reevaluated. But avoiding denial is also crucial, which is to say that we have to acknowledge all that we won't ever fully escape, starting with the psychological damage wrought by rejection and heteronormativity. Queer hope doesn't deny the suffering at the origin of our stories. It lies in the possibility of manipulating that suffering, of reshaping and reinvesting it within forms of all our own. Transported then by this queer hope, our dazzling celebration recognize our pride and visibility, but also our differences, our bad memories, our night terrors, our traumas, our illnesses, our deaths, our losses, and our struggles. Our celebrations don't silence the pains that hound us. Our celebrations are histories, shows, stories, performances that provide us with an occasion to name our suffering and discomforts, to flaunt their mark on our bodies, on the old skin we so wish we could shed. I'm reminded of Arca's song Piel, of the holy queer melancholy expressed when they sing, Quítame la piel de ayer, no sé caer. This skin we either choose to leave be or cover in sequence, because together we're free to recount our weaknesses, because together we can take care of each other. To read other essays then, to blur the threshold between good and bad feelings, between joy and sadness, between pride and shame, between public and private, to put an end, in short, to binaries, and to take advantage of the potential held in stories of depression, the potential to encourage new affiliations, to read essays to situate my depression, Latina and queer, among the depressions of members of my communities, among the depressions of others around which together we dance. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicolas, for bringing to us that wonderful work, which goes to the point of the panel today, talking about intersectional identities. Thank you. And then we can move to the second presentation of the panel with Liliana Gonzalez Jarquin, who will present her work Micronude. Liliana Gonzalez Jarquin is an emerging artist born and raised on the east side of Montreal. Coming from parents who fled the Salvadorian Civil War, she integrates shared memories of a familiar and unfamiliar land into her work. Growing up with the internet around her, Liliana focuses on how technologies can influence and shape our identities, beliefs, and culture, and primarily how they can affect marginalized communities. Her most recent work, Micronude, started as a healing art project and is now evolving into research and understanding the social construction generated through social media. So thank you, Liliana.
Okay, hi everybody. Yes, my name is Liliana Gonzalez, and today I will present you a work that I've been doing for the last 2 years. It's called a Micronude, but it's about like resisting the algorithm of social media. And when I'm not resisting the algorithm, I'm an art history undergrad student at UQAM. But today we're gonna talk about like Micronude. Voilà. Yeah, so what is a Micronude? A Micronude, it's like from the first world, it's like something extremely small, and also something like a nude from like not wearing clothes, being naked.
Hello everyone, my name is Micronude. Liliana identified me in 2020 as an error left by the creators of Facebook's algorithm. Through art, my purpose is to advocate for social media users and mainly communities whose algorithms have marginalized their bodies. Thanks to the use of zoom out pictures, I am easy to identify. But no matter my appearance, what makes me unique are my intentions.
Yes, so to come back, thank you, Micronude. To come back to what Micronude just said, it's like the first, like I started to do this like 2 years ago, and the first trial was like from 2020 to 2021. And you can see like when she said like, it doesn't matter the appearance, it's because the, so yes, so the first trial was very like simple, and like I really was just trying to test the algorithm to see if you could see like naked pictures. So I ended up knowing like, no, I could not like see the pictures, but in the first trial, I did some mistake, and some of the mistake was like to use hashtag, and it's like part of the trial. So if you use a Micronude, please don't use a hashtag, because they're really like bad for the Micronude. And it was interesting because as soon as I start to use hashtag, I also start to receiving key to talk with the oversight board. The oversight board, it's the first like committee of Instagram that actually decide what should be on Instagram and what should not be on Instagram. It started in 2020, so to have key was like a proof that something was like really special about Micronude. And at the same, and it was also the time that some of my pictures were like being deleted. But at the same time of being like in touch with the oversight board, I was also like, Instagram was also giving me like money. It was giving me a $20 to do promotion, and I used that money to actually like promote the Micronudes. But Micronude got like, the first trial got like shut down like after a year, and in April 2021, I started like this new Micronude, but as you can see, it's like in a really like a smaller community, and it's also like in a private community. So it's it helps to not get my picture report but human, and like don't forget this is like against the algorithm and not against like people were against the naked pictures. And the second year I stopped to do research and to read about like cyber feminists and algorithm, and I started to be more creative, and it was very interesting because I feel it's also a way to bypass the algorithm, because like it's not only just a little picture, but there's like now a background, and it could be confusing for the algorithm. But as I say a little, like what I'm fighting, it's like Facebook community standard, which are like name objectional content, and it's adult nudity and sexual and activity sexual and solicitation. I think like this rule are kind of oppressive for the female body, and not just for the female body, but for like some body, not like all the bodies. So it's very so as I said, like it's about like what I'm against. It's uncover female nipple who are not in the context of motherhood, and also like who are not in related to a health situation. So this like this and also so this rules, this policy, it's very special because it's really stable the female body, and it also like, as we know, it like it make a difference between female and male, and it's a reinforce the sexualization of the female body. Those micro nude that I'm showing you are still online, and it's like still working. I'm also against sexual like the policy about sexual solicitation. I'm not a sex worker, but I do stand with sex workers, and I think social media should be like a place where they could actually relate it to their work and find more work. So micronude, like I said, it's really against the algorithm, but you have to test it. And like this picture, it's not anymore on Instagram, it got deleted. And what's interesting is that this year I finally got to know like what the filter looks like. So like, remember, like this is my original picture, and this is like the filter picture, and you can see like very much like I draw some line on it, like what the filter is. And this is what it's telling me, is that you see like the gray zone just over here. The gray zone are actually the weak part of the algorithm. So this is like super important because you can like, it's where you can like put, and you see like in this picture, like the nipple of this model was really on the dark section. So having this information this year, this was like really recent, I did this. So you can clearly see that there's like a naked female, but you can see like in the gray section, it's bigger, and it's still not being like deleted or like see by the algorithm. I did it like more and more micro, like going through the picture. So yes, micronude, I have it to explain this to like for you to understand like what micronude is. And yes. Okay, but the reason that today I'm here in this panel and I decided to be part of this panel, it's because like it's like how I experience micronude, and I feel like it's a social issue that it's part of the Latinx reality. So I call it the pivotal event. So it was back in 2019, like my ex-boyfriend shared some naked pictures of me to his friends. And it was like this is like a real like social problem. This is from like the Ministère de la Justice of Canada. And it's weird because like in this page, you can see like it's illegal to do like to do porn revenge, what it's called. But it's also like all the information, it's about like a survey from Texas. So it's telling you that like really like do we really care in Canada about this if we're not even taking the time to do the right research? And just last summer, we find out that in Montreal there were a group called Telegraph, where 3,000 people were sending naked pictures to themselves and sending like OnlyFans pictures. So it's a real problem, sexual. It's a real problem, porn revenge. But what was also part of this pivotal problem event that I called is that was the second text, and the second text was about it was like after to send the picture, it was this is what it's like to date a Latina, and that was like very shocking for me to know that my ex-boyfriend like was with me just for fantasize purpose. So that was for a class. It's not a visual class, it's really an art history class where we got to be creative. And I decided that was in 2021, and I decided to look like what the algorithm was saying about Latina women. And I find out but that was in 2021. And I find out that like Latina women, like what's related, it's like Latina women saw Latina women seeking for men. So very, very like hard stereotype. And like I said before, I think Mark Renaud said it, it's like what we see like on the algorithm, it's usually reflection of what's in real life. So to know like just to confirm again by an algorithm that this is like a very strong stereotype that's like to us was very, very something hard. It was like during like 2020 when we were all like inside that I decided to like, it was also during that cancel culture thing. So I didn't think it was like very the right approach for me to do a cancel culture thing. But I knew like I did lose control of my body. And this is like what I was looking for, to regain that control. And we were all like inside looking at our phone, and like I was like a lot of time in social media. And social media, it's that like platform where like you get to see what people are doing without them knowing. And this is like something also like you can like find on like porn revenge, I guess, like when you receive a picture of someone and then like you decide what to do, like you should you look at it or not. So in 2020, I decided to start this, and those are the first micronudes that I started to do it. So as you can see, there were really, really small micronudes, and I knew like people would try to zoom on them, but I also like I was very surprised by all the reaction of everybody. It's like everybody was really trying to like see what's the what's inside of the micronude. And like people didn't even know like, is it you or is it not you? But like it's so small that you cannot see. And micronude also like plays with the interaction. So in like, I know like it's possible to screenshot and to zoom, but yet if you do that to a micronude, you're just gonna see this. So it's like, I feel it's at that moment, and that was really the beginning of micronude. And it's like micronude started as a way of healing. And I feel like at that moment, I was more like in control of like who could see my body, who could not see my body. And even if like they would try to zoom, they will not see. So I feel like at that moment, I was like kind of winning. And the commentary, like this is in French, but was very interesting. Like people were like, this is really like, of course, like there were like some commentary about like, I want to see more. But there were other commentary like more critical about micronude, who were like, I should not have zoom on this because I'm not seeing anything right now. So yes, this is micronude. This is how like it started. It started by me trying to like regain control of my body, and to end up like understanding that through my classes of art history that there's like a glitch, and a glitch is something that you can use at your favor to resist something bigger, which is like the algorithm who has like turned to be like very sometimes racist, sexist, and really not and making some unfairness. So this is my project, Micronude. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Liliana, for this amazing project of yours on social media and talking about regaining control over your own body. And we can go to the third presentation of the panel with Francisco Fernando Granados, who will be presenting Who Claims Abstraction, Queer Contextual Practice as Refuge. Francisco Fernando Granados is an artist and writer born in Guatemala. He lives in Toronto, the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Since 2005, his multidisciplinary practice has traced his movement from convention refugee to critical citizen, using abstraction performatively, site-specifically, and relationally to create projects that challenge the stability of practices of recognition. These projects extend from drawing and performance into installation, publishing, and public art. Granados' work has developed from the intersection of formal painterly training, working in performance through artist-run spaces, intellectual engagement with queer and feminist theory, and early activism as a peer support facilitator with newcomer communities and unceded coast Salish territories. Thank you, Francisco Fernando.
Thank you so much, Diogo. Thank you, Tamara. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you to my fellow panelists. It's an honor to be here. As a way to position myself, I would also like to thank Kenzie Cornejo for her powerful articulation of the North American colonial interventionist practices that built upon Spanish colonial practices to create the political conditions that have made a lot of us refugees. I would also like to thank everybody at yesterday's panel, moderated by Nuria Cartón de Gramont, for articulating the possibilities and contradictions of mestizaje. I see myself in both of these explorations of positionality. And something I can say in terms of positionality and why I'm happy to be here is because in terms of feeling seen, I think one of the moments I felt the most seen in my life, actually, especially since coming to North America, is when in New York, standing on the street, somebody passed me by and shouted, "Are you Puerto Rican?" And that felt like, in terms of how my body is read sometimes in public, that felt like the closest, you know, whereas say, for example, here in Canada, I came to Canada in 2001, 4 months before 9/11 with my mother, my father, my two brothers. And in this process of becoming refugee, I was also at the same time in the process of understanding my queerness. I was 16, and in the process of understanding myself as an artist. And my position was not something that I could take for granted people would understand. The way I felt on the inside was not necessarily the way that people would read me. Being with my mother, for example, often we would be taken for, people would think we were Iranian. Walking on the street on 9/11, somebody called me a terrorist because I guess they made some racist assumption about who I was and where I came from. Whereas here in Toronto, sometimes, because I am light skinned, and they don't know what my mother or my brother looks like. I often get taken for white. So feminism for me, and the intersection of queerness with feminism is important as a grounding intuition. The intersection of feminism and queerness is for me a liberatory space where I could learn how to be a man outside of the patriarchal expectations of my upbringing. Nicolas's quote about inhabiting a category uncomfortably, I think that really resonated for me in terms of how I feel about being understood as a man, being recognized as a man in my queerness. Whether it is through the example of my mother, my grandmother, my aunt, working in community and learning from politicized, critical feminist artists, or studying feminist theory, I would not be queer in the way that I am, and I would not see the world queerly if it wasn't for the kinds of feminisms that I have learned from. One of my favorite feminist theorists is Gayatri Chakraborty-Spivak, and she gives this, I think, very useful definition of feminism, where she says, a great definition for the work of feminism is to research how humankind is not nice to women and queers in different ways. And she says, that goes from everything from passive-aggressive behavior to brutal violence. Let us take a step back and assume that culture is a set of largely unacknowledged assumptions held by a loosely outlined group of people, mapping negotiations between the sacred and the profane, and the relationship between the sexes, with sexual difference unevenly abstracted into gendering, because gender is our first instrument of abstraction. So here's a little diagram of these intersections. Something that's really important for me, especially in the context of this panel, as a learning from feminism, is the notion of practices of citation, of trying to trace different lines of where one comes from and how what one comes to be, and all the different intersections that create, this practice of being queer in art, being queer and Latinx in art, being a queer Latinx artist who's informed by feminism. Something that, especially thinking about, for example, the way that Liliana's practice is so shaped by the internet and the accessibility of internet and the ubiquity of internet, the way that the internet is everywhere and it allows us to see so many things. Coming up as an artist at the beginning of the 20th century, even though the internet was there, one could not take for granted that you could necessarily find everything, or that you could find things that reflected your identity back to you as I was becoming an artist. And so before talking a little bit about some of my work, I'd like to just acknowledge some lines of influence, some people that I think have shaped me through learning, from lifelong friends to teachers, to people that I admire but have never met, to people that I have known at times and perhaps don't necessarily know anymore. This is Mexican-American painter, abstract painter, Virginia Jaramillo, alongside one of my digital compositions called Letters. African-American conceptual artist, Adrian Piper, in a rarely known series of works called Drawings About Paper and Writings About Words from the 1960s. Brazilian modernist artist, Ligia Pape, who people would tell me about before I learned, people would see my work and say, oh, this work reminds me of Ligia Pape. And there was a sort of beautiful queer sense of understanding in not necessarily having known her as I was starting to work in abstraction, finding these works that made me, that I could see echoes of, that made me feel understood. Obviously, Felix Gonzalez Torres, Cuban American conceptual artist, and perhaps as I was a student, the artist that was in the textbooks, in the art textbooks, that was the closest to something to someone I could identify with. Regina Jose Galindo, Guatemalan performance artist. I think I started art school in 2004, drawing and painting, and in my first year of art school, I began making performance outside of school as part of my community. And probably one of the few times around that time that I saw Guatemala being talked about in a way that wasn't necessarily about, primarily about the war or about violence, was when Regina Jose Galindo won the Golden Lion in Venice, at the Venice Biennial in 2005. Naufus Ramirez Figueroa, who's a queer Guatemalan performance artist who was based out of Vancouver. When I was young, he invited me to be a part of a performance workshop when I was 20 out of Gallery Gachet. And I remember actually the first and only lesson he gave us on performance art was say, bore them to death, which I think remains very useful as a lesson to this day. Christina Lipodesva, a mixed-race American conceptual artist who ran a school within a school called Color School as her MFA project at UBC, and who really taught me about the importance of incorporating community-based practices into my work. Margaret Dragoo, who is a teacher and a friend of mine and an ongoing collaborator. This is a map that she makes of her movement through the city in relationship to a drawing that I've sent her. Golbu Amani and Manolo Lugo, who are two artists of my generation. He is of Mexican origin. She is of Iranian origin, who are a brother and a sister. And actually artists who began in Vancouver and, like me, eventually moved to Toronto. In terms of my early performance practice, there was, I think, for the first couple of years of my practice, a real search to look for what it was that my body was doing in this context of going from convention refugee, from refugee claimant to convention refugee to resident, and eventually to citizen. This is a work called Dream Act, which actually references an American law, but in the spirit of thinking about what it meant to be a Latin American immigrant in North America, I asked my brother, Javier Granados Amayoa, for his pillow. And I covered it with gold and I gave it to him to sleep on the night before his high school graduation. And I asked for permission to go and photograph him while he slept. As a way to acknowledge, what it meant for our parents in a way to take us out of Guatemala, just after 36 years of civil war. But also what it meant to create a kind of private intervention rather than a public intervention that tried to figure what it's like to live at the intersection of being a Latin American refugee, but understanding the world and understanding even notions of family in a queer way. This is a performance called Contact Study, where I pressed my body against the contours of the architecture and traced the sort of greasy imprint with gold as a way to also think about the relationship between Canada and Guatemala, as Canada as a colonial nation that exploits Latin America mostly through mining companies, or at least in important ways through mining companies, and as a way to think of the ways in which I'm implicated, and the ways in which, by virtue of having made it to Canada, by virtue of having made it through a refugee process, I become complicit, whether I want to or not. a series of performances where thinking about these sort of cultural stereotypes of Latin America, I began thinking a lot about dancing and dancing reggaeton and dancing sort of Latin dance music, which would be the kinds of things that people would know about the culture, even if they didn't know the culture. This is a performance called Crown, where I created a crown for my feet and then danced in a public square in Vancouver. A performance called Bomba, where I made a playlist of songs that used the extended metaphor of the hips as weapons. And then I danced with the Presbyterian architecture of, oh, here, there's the ambulance. Sorry, I'm in a very busy corner of downtown Toronto. So Bomba, I danced with the architecture of this Presbyterian building at U of T. I have only ever been a lover in English, where I drew a saliva line that was as long as the wall that dried before it was over. Spatial Profiling, which is a performance that I've done over the years, where I trace the outline of my profile as I move through space. This version was created for a queer performance festival in Regina. Here's a version from Finland. Eventually, this performance practice really led me to thinking a lot about not necessarily just performing with my body, but I think especially as I became a citizen, I wanted to figure out ways that my work could make spaces for other bodies or could create responses in other bodies that I could shape. This is a piece that was created for Nuit Blanche here in recognize from Hips Don't Lie. It's the last line from Wycliffe Jean's rap, which is refugees run the seas because we own our own boats. And I changed the word boat to the word vote. And it appeared as a public work for about a month and a half around the time of the election when we changed from Stephen Harper to Justin Trudeau. This is another version of Refugees Run the Seas in my first solo show, which took place in the YMCA Newcomer Welcome Center in St. John, New Brunswick. And one of the things that I was really interested in doing with this was centering immigrant and refugee people as the public for contemporary art. Just to sort of wrap up, I think I'm close to time, aren't I, Diogo? From that, and because of some trauma that eventually sort of happened in my life, both of these very sort of hardcore performative ways of working and these hardcore conceptual ways of working, eventually I couldn't work that way anymore. And I turned about 6 years ago to working through abstraction, working through site-specific abstraction as a way to think about what's in some ways the negative space of identity, the things that can't be articulated through identity, the moments where as bodies, as minds, words can't necessarily do the job. And in creating the presentation for this panel, I realized that something that's really important that's at stake in this work is the idea of abstraction and site-specific abstraction and abstraction that can move as a practice of queer pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Francisco Fernando, for your presentation and all you showed of your work. I think that there's a lot to be said at the end during our conversation. And I'll go then to the last presentation of the panel with Camila Salcedo, who will present performance art as a tool for identity searching. Camila Salcedo is an interdisciplinary artist, curator, and facilitator born in Venezuela and based in Toronto, working primarily in textiles, digital art, and community art practices. There are a few threads that run through her work, including camouflage as a way to blur lines and break down social assumptions, memory as an empowering tool for time travel and creating new speculative realities, and recycling and upcycling and recycling to piece together patchworks, both materially by reusing and mending textiles, and digitally by appropriating found audio and video footage. She's also a co-founder of Colectivo Satelital, a collective of 6 Venezuelan-born artists based in Toronto, creating digital platforms for emerging artists. So thank you, Camila.
Thank you, first of all, everybody else for your presentations. I'm so excited to be amongst this group, and it's really great to learn about all your practices. As Diogo mentioned, I'm based in Toronto, but today I'm joining you from the outskirts of Washington, D.C. in Maryland, which is Piscataway and Nacotchtank or Anacostan land. So today I'll be speaking about the use of performance and textiles to embody personas and characters as tools for self-expression of queer and feminist identities. More specifically, how I've used it, and exploring gendered assumptions. Exploring gendered assumptions and stereotypes, Miss Universe addresses the prevalence of the beauty industry in Venezuela and its effects on gendered assumptions. And my new drag persona currently in development, Camila Salcedo, will explore masculine coding through performing as a salsa singer and reclaiming the traditional men's garment of the guayabera. Oh, what is happening? Okay, so in 2017, I started performing as Miss Universe. I don't know why it's so slow right now. Hopefully it loads. But I started performing as Miss Universe in South Africa, where I did a semester abroad. And while I was there, I was thinking a lot about how I was being read. And when I spoke English to people, a lot of their assumptions was, oh, you're American. And then when I told them I was born in Venezuela, the first thing they would say, oh, Miss Universe or beautiful woman. So that's something that I really started to think about a lot, and how I didn't feel I fit any of these kind of categories that I was being read as, especially being in South Africa too, being in the context of post-apartheid. People would come up to me and speak to me in Afrikaans, and I began to understand kind of how differently I am read based on the context that I'm in. Around that time too, I was just, I was studying in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and the Latin American population is extremely small. So I think I was also really thinking about who am I really? And kind of really struggling with, I guess, identity labels and how to personally identify, because I find I occupy a lot of gray spaces with being born in Venezuela, but living in Canada, being pansexual, but also gender fluid, feeling that I'm not really in any one specific category. So this performance was, I created this outfit where it was almost like a post-apocalyptic outfit, futurist outfit that I crocheted. At the time, masks weren't being worn all the time, so it's totally taken on a different symbolism now. But during the performance, I wrote a poem on the glass, and I was kind of encased in this outdoor space, and the public was inside. And then when the performance ended, I kind of broke the fourth wall and entered the space. I want to show a snippet of a video. So in my last year of university in 2018, I did a performance with Miss Universe called Miss Universe Flight Attends, and there's no sound, but I'll just play a bit of it. I guess through travel too, I was just thinking about globalization and my body and kind of where I fit in all these different spaces. In 2018 was kind of the year between, I moved to Canada in 2007 when I was 11 years old. So at the time I was 22, and I was thinking about almost this crossover year where I've spent half my time in Venezuela, half my time in Canada, but I've never returned to the country. So I was really struggling with this idea of being exiled not out of my own choice, like as a child, because my parents brought me here, and kind of, yeah, just thinking about what that meant in terms of like my own choice and citizenship and travel and how we got to Canada. And yeah, so the background kind of changes, and it is also supposed to be kind of comical. Let me go back. And then I started to play with Miss Universe, less so as like a beauty pageant contestant, let's say, or winner, but more as a military like figure, and just thinking about like the army and how masculine and patriarchal it is, and how it is used as a symbol for nationalism. And in doing these performances, I was trying to kind of break down that image of the military. And here I did a performance where I was thinking about, again, like being in Canada for 10 years and my crossover year happening, thinking about the letter X in Roman numerals and how that's the number 10. And then I was thinking about how an X is kind of like the convergence of two lines and where two identities meet. And so I did this performance where I use like musical notation and drumming, where X is the hi-hat. So I was like reading this poem with the symbol. And then after I graduated, I did kind of an 8-year, I wanted to travel for a full year, but, or sorry, 8 month. I ended up just being able to travel for 8 months, but I did a couple of residencies in Mexico, a couple in Argentina, and traveled around other countries of Latin America. I also went to Chile and Colombia and Peru. And in every single country I went to, I met family I had never met before because of the Venezuelan migration that was really, really prevalent in 2014, 2015 onwards. A lot of my family members left the country as well, and I found myself kind of learning about my diaspora in a different way through my travels. This is a pattern, a textile pattern I created when I was in Mexico, taking the map of the Americas and kind of camouflaging it in different colors. And then I created these 2 separate outfits, thinking about the 2 kind of versions of Miss Universe that I've created. So here's like the beauty pageant, like hyper feminized persona, and then there's the like military character. And I also created these earrings where the map is flipped upside down. So kind of, again, thinking about my identity as being from this continent and kind of the intermingling of like the 2 contexts I've lived in and how it has informed my identity. And obviously playing with gender as well, like 2 different, very different ways of being read and understood. And then I went to Argentina and did a performance where I crocheted, like I cut and crocheted the flags of the 10 countries in the Americas with the most Venezuelan migrants. And I did this performance where I was the military Miss Venezuela, and it was placing the flags down on this map and would stand on the map for the number of seconds based on like the number of Venezuelan migrants in that country. And then I kind of laid down on top of it and was just really thinking again about my diaspora. It was interesting too doing this performance in Argentina because again, like thinking about context and how I was being read in the context of Argentina, the military has a really violent history. So I think that reading was also totally different from one that I expected, but also I'm kind of clowning the military, kind of clowning that performance or clowning that like identity through performance. And yeah, now moving on to this year, I am working on a new performance character called Camila Salcedo, which is kind of a play on my name, my legal name. And these are like a few, I guess, inspiration images. I want to read just kind of, I guess, a proposal I wrote recently for this character. So the performance that I'll be performing, hopefully by the end of next month, will be called Buscando Guayaba, which is a reference to a Rubén Blades song. Will be a drag performance through which I explore my gender and sexual identity via visual elements of guayaberas, which is this traditional men's shirt that you can see here. Growing up, I always kind of looked at the men in my family wear this shirt on Sundays, on special occasions, for weddings, funerals, and I have started thinking a lot about that, the symbol of that shirt, when my mother started dating a Canadian man, and I saw him wearing this shirt, and I, for some reason, like felt very offended by it, just because to me, like, I grew up with Latin men wearing this shirt, and so I started thinking about, okay, like who gets to claim, who gets to wear that shirt, and is traditionally one worn by men. So I started thinking about what happens if I wear guayabera. So I've been pattern drafting them, kind of sewing ones to fit my own body because my hips are so large. Traditional guayaberas don't fit my body, so I've had to kind of play around with like pattern drafting as well to fit like my body and my context. And then also I'm thinking of like the word guayabera and the word guayaba, which sounds very similar. And so I'm also going to be kind of consuming and playing with the cultural significance of the fruit. And so through this drag persona, I aim to deconstruct the binary ways that female gender was invented and the particular toxic Venezuelan beauty standards and gender expectations, as I was kind of speaking about earlier. Additionally, via the use of fruits, I will question the ways in which Catholicism demonizes same-sex experiences and gender fluidity, which as a former devout practitioner continues to be an ingrained source of inner shame. And fruits in the faith are also traditionally symbols of sin, indulgence, gluttony, sexual deviance, and lust, also like in art history, which is why I have chosen them to subvert feelings of shame into self-acceptance and pleasure. So the salsero is also a performance character, is also significant as this music genre has vastly been dominated by male singers and often views women as objects to be consumed, lacking a nuanced gender fluid perspective. And here's just an image of some of my working process. So like I said, I'm drafting my own outfit, and I've been paper macheing guavas that I'd like to incorporate into the performance. And I also was taught by a makeup artist, Hallie, recently to apply facial hair, which was a really interesting process, just thinking about how a lot of times men are like taught to shave, and in this case I'm like teaching myself how to apply facial hair. So that's just, I guess, an expression of other ways that I want to explore my gender through performance. And I think I'll leave it there just to make sure we're good on time. Thank you.
Wonderful presentation, and also a lot of elements to add to our discussion. First of all, I'd like to invite all the audience to send us their questions using the Q&A. And I'll start by maybe telling you, saying some words that I think are repeated all along the four presentations. The first one is an idea of authorization. So who's authorized to do what and when? So you have talked about who's authorized to show their own body, who's authorized to do abstraction, who's also authorized to be depressed. The second word is universalism. So is there a universal depression? Is there a illness that is touching everyone the same way? Is there a universal experience of porn revenge, or being a Latina woman makes that that experience a particular one? And is there a universalism connected to abstraction as well? In Latin America, the debate on figurative or abstract art always touched that question of universalism, because doing abstract art was supposed to be a universal way of doing art. So it's interesting to think about an abstract art which is Latin American or which is queer. The third word is stereotype. So you've all talked about that in different ways. Nicolas talked about at a certain point of telenovelas and the way people perceive it in a negative way as well as a stereotypical element. The idea of the Latina woman, Latino music, the idea of Miss Universe, and regarding stereotypes, the way we are, people are read, and the dichotomy of reading and being read. So being read by others and what you can read. It was also a question you talked about. And the last word what I would like to mention, and my question to you all will come from that word, is the question of where. So there's a very strong where all the time in your presentations, and the control over where. So how I'm perceived depends where I am. So where I'm being read and seen, and where I'm heard. We could think about Nicolas' book being translated into English. So the where changes in a way, the whom changes. We can talk about being seen in the digital world in the case of Liliana. So the where Camila talked a lot about traveling and being seen in different ways. And Francisco Fernando also about producing in a different context and being perceived, how that abstraction is also has a different perception in different places. So my question is, how do you deal with that where and the idea of control or lack of control on the perception people have over your work, depending on that where? Who would like to start? Let's go with Nicolas. I'll go in the order of the presentations.
Okay. Well, for me, it's a challenge actually for the where with the translation, because it's the first time my work is being translated, and it's a challenge, but it's also sort of a blessing, because I was very lucky. There are a million things we can say about translation. One of them is the translation from what works in French being translated to English. It's not an equal thing. Many English literature, Canadian literature is being translated into French, and it's not that many works in French are being translated into English. So you're extremely lucky when it happens to you, and it has nothing to do, well, nothing. It doesn't have a lot to do with sales or the quality of the book. It has to do with, well, those things, but also the people you know, who reads your book, and if it suddenly comes into the hands of a translator. And that happened to me, and that's how I met David. And what happened here is that it became sort of a friendship. And so we're friends now. And so I've worked a lot with him, well, a lot, not that much, but I worked a little bit with him on the translation itself. I read English, obviously, so I was able to read his many drafts and comment those drafts, but I didn't have like a final decision opportunity. He then worked with an editor. So I had to sort of let go, which is something I'm really used to. Being a writer, you always have to sort of let go your work when it's being published, because it's been read by many people and people say whatever they want to say about your work. So, reading this in English for me to an English-speaking audience is something really strange for me, because I feel like the form of the book is different, the texts are different, they feel a little bit more, I don't know, sort of like more political, more like activist text than I feel that it sounds like in French. I don't know, so I feel like the where is becoming something very, very abstract, something that I don't really grasp. I've been in the literary world in Quebec for almost 15 years now, so it's I really can grasp that world. I really understand it, and now I feel like it's just going somewhere. I know that Brick Books also distributes around the world, especially in the United States, so I'm just completely baffled by that. I don't know what to think about that, since I come from this very, very small milieu, you know. A small milieu where there are many different people, but it's still quite sort of homogeneous. And being Latino, queer, well, there's just a few folks that are like me. So this where, because like this translation is also sort of a trip my book is going towards, and I don't know if it'll return, and going to so many different kinds of people that I don't know what's going to happen to it. So it's sort of an experience of letting go even further than what I'm used to. And it's not a difficult process. I have to say I'm pretty used to that kind of process, not only because I've been in that world for 15 years, but also because I think that when you are an artist or a writer, someone that does public things, that is not born where we do those things, and it's not like part of a huge majority. And also when we talk about that minority, you know, when we talk about queer things and racialized things and diasporic things, we are used to sort of letting go parts of ourselves that will be read by others without having a lot of agency over that readings, you know. So yeah, I'm really excited more than just scared, you know, but I'm kind of scared, but not really. I mean, we're used to that. So
wonderful, thank you. Liliana?
Well, it's very interesting because like I want people to know about micronude, because I don't want it to only be for me. I think it's something that everybody like who has something against an algorithm or who has like been marginalized by an algorithm should know. But then it's like it's the glitch itself, like not micronude, but like I cannot control like if someone with bad intention could know like about this and like use it for bad things. So yes, the word is very important, but it's very important to know like to let people know that what it is and what is the real intention of like micronude. And so I talk a lot in like Twitter Spaces. It's a platform on Twitter where you get to talk with a lot of people from around the world about micronude. And I feel like when I explain it, it's like how I want it, and I control how it, like the discord around micronude, and it's something that I really like. But also I cannot control if someone like with bad intention end up with this glitch, not micronude, but the glitch.
Thank you. Francisco Fernando?
Thank you. I think because abstraction has such a dominant history of authorship and claims to universality, the thing that I think I'm interested in, the thing that it feels like keeps me in abstraction is finding ways of making it context specific, you know, whether it is a kind of in terms of authorization or authorship, finding those moments where authorship is sort of shared or slippery, or where I create a performative structure and somebody else steps into it, or whether it is, in terms of universality, I'm interested in the way that abstraction can, for example, make it so that an art historian's interpretation or feeling or response to a work is not necessarily more or less valuable than a young person or a football fan who might chance upon it. Because I am perceived in such ambiguous ways, and because it's so different depending on where I am, I think the only honest place from which I can make work is by trying to hone in on those moments of ambiguity and trying to use context, whether it is architecture, whether it is a political moment, whether it is to find sort of like a contact point between context and these forms, and to figure out how to activate those forms in ways that might make people feel differently and that might jolt people out of stereotypical perceptions, refugees owning their votes,
Wonderful, thank you. Camila.
Maybe this is an obvious answer, but I think for me, performance has been that tool of kind of like taking control over how I'm read and taking those stereotypes and turning them on their head completely, like the salsa being such a North American obsession with like ballroom dancing or beauty pageants and kind of like the standard of beauty that is expected of, particularly in my experience being Venezuelan and having grown up as a woman. So I think for me, it really has been, performance has been that way of kind of manipulating the audience and being like, no, now you get to look at me and this is like my chance to speak in a way. Yeah.
Thank you. We'll have one question from the audience. We have 5 minutes left, so if you could give brief answers to that question, please. So it's Mariana who says, interesting that performance runs through the artwork presented today. Would the artist like to speak to their experience or choice in using their own body in their creative practice, the drive to perform, whether live or for the camera? And also, I'm curious to hear their thoughts on their performance versus the documentation as the artwork. Maybe Camila or Francisco Fernando could start.
Sure. I find it interesting, like the question about documentation. I found like, especially early on, I would just forget to videotape my art. So I just mostly have like photos of it, but I find that interesting as well, just because I do think that there is a difference between like being there and being in the context of the place where the performance was performed versus watching a video interpretation of it. So that's why I kind of separate like live performance from video performance. I did show a snippet of video performance because to me, performing for the camera is totally different. So that's kind of my approach to it.
I would say for me, in my early work, I was grappling with a transformation that really had to do with my body being read in a completely different way, having completely different access to rights, to possibilities. And so I could not paint the things that I needed to deal with. And so I had to deal with my body. I think as time has gone on, I started teaching, and I think teaching is such a performance that a lot of my energy went into that. And I think the way that it's transformed for me is I'm much more interested, perhaps because I used to do this facilitation work, community facilitation work. I'm much more interested as an artist in building spaces or building sensory experiences that I can invite, that people can access, that people can choose to access. And I think that's also a little bit of a queer politic of being in relation, not just with family, or not just with people I love, or not just with people that I'm in community with, but I'm really interested in encounter, my work creating encounters with strangers, and perhaps affecting them in ways, having an effect on them that I will never know.
Thank you. Very briefly, Nicolas, I know you do lots of reading, public reading of your work. Do you see it in a way as performance, how the presence of the body changes the relation to the text?
I don't think about the body a lot in those things. I mostly think about the voice. And I do a lot of readings. Actually, I did one yesterday evening. Some, like, for example, so one of the people that read with me on stage, I have read his text some weeks ago, and when he read it, I felt that the text was really better than I thought. I actually already thought it was quite good, but I was like, okay, no, this is a very great text. So I feel like when I perform the text, I really feel I'm performing them, which is something different than just reading, and I'm not a performer. I'm not a performance artist either, but I really feel that the only way I'm able to perform without, pretending being someone else or doing something else is with the voice. When I write, I read out loud what I write, which is not something very, rare. It's really, really common. But I do it precisely because I think, or at least I hope, that those texts will be read out loud by others or by me, by myself. So yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks so much for the four of you. This has been a really wonderful panel. I really enjoyed hearing you all. Thank you again to Sur Gallery for allowing us to meet in this way and get to know each other and share experiences. Thank you so much.